Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Modernizing Manufacturing Using WMS and MES to Meet FSMA Traceability and Accelerate Digital Transformation. We're excited that you could join us. My name is Laura Beth Ezel, and I'll be moderating today's event. Now, today we are going to take a deep dive into why digital tools are critical for food and beverage manufacturers, especially small and mid-size operations, as regulatory demands like the FDA's Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA, Traceability Rule 204 tighten. Pressure is mounting, not just for compliance, but for proactive modernization. On today's webinar, we have an expert who will explain how these tools can help you gain access to real-time data, implement lean practices, scale up, and prepare for regulatory changes. We are thrilled to have Steve join us today, but before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items. Please note that the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button that's located in the top right corner of your presentation window. If you need technical assistance, click on the Help widget located on the bottom left corner of your console. Now, we do encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. We will try to answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or we just run out of time, it will be answered later via email. So please know we do capture all your questions. All right, to kick off, I'd like to have Steve introduce himself. Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Name is Steve Pombert. I'm the product manager for Datacor for the MES and warehouse management products. Been doing that for quite a while now. I have, probably 25 years of industry experience in manufacturing and distribution. A strong emphasis in food and beverage. Probably half that time has been in food and beverage. And then also I have probably about half my career has been really on the customer side and the corporate side of that business, as well as on the software and services side. So I like to think I kind of come at that situation from both angles. In addition to that, I've also probably facilitated, maybe 50 or so lean consulting engagements for many of those customers. I've also been certified in smart manufacturing through MIT. So I've just have a kind of a broad range of skills in this particular area. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of that with you today.
We're looking forward to that as well. So, let's get right to it here. And to kick us off, let's start with setting the stage for understanding the latest industry buzzword here. Smart factory. Yeah.
Yeah. Smart factory. It is a bit of an industry buzzword. You may hear other terminologies like Industry 4.0. You may hear about things like digital factory, things of that nature. But smart factory, I think, is a pretty good definition overall. And as you'll see on this slide, there are basically 4 different maturity levels, as I would like to call them, along that smart manufacturing journey. The first one overall is basically customers are doing a lot of their data analysis and data gathering out on the shop floor in a manual way. They may be having the particular production order and they're on a clipboard and the operator is making notes as to how production is going. Overall, they may be tracking the different time and so forth. And one of the big ones that is a big topic for today is trying to manage the traceability of the raw materials to the finished goods. Again, if that is being done in a manual process out on the shop floor, as you might imagine, it's a little difficult to keep track of that, make sure it's accurate and timely overall. So that's kind of that first basic level. Many of our customers fall into this category, especially if you're into that small to mid-sized company size and scope. So many of our customers are doing this, and part of the reason why they're trying to head down this smart factory journey. But basically, the goal is to digitalize this process overall. So we're connecting devices out on the shop floor and connecting different applications and systems. So in this particular case, you may have an MES system, you may have a ERP system, you may have a warehousing system that you want them to connect together and work together in a kind of a harmony way. So, from that standpoint, basic data number one is kind of the current situation for many folks. So the goal then is to migrate to that level 2. And I think this is where most of the people should initially focus overall. When we get, I'll talk a little bit about level 3 and level 4, just to give you a bit of an explanation there. But really, level 2 is where that data can be accessed more in a structured and understandable form because it's been digitalized and those tools are being used. And then that data is basically available for visualization out on the shop floor as well as throughout the manufacturing facility to assist in that processing. So again, think about the value this particular brings in that traceability mindset is I can automatically track what raw materials I am using for a particular production finished good. And so I've got that linkage and that digital trail of what that is. And so then from there, we're trying to basically integrate that directly into the ERP so that the ERP, which is basically the system of record for that traceability and that inventory from that standpoint, basically you want that done in a timely and accurate way. And basically if you're doing that manually, timing's a bit of an issue, accuracy has a tendency to be a bit of an issue. And so the whole concept of digitalizing that and making a real-time interaction with the ERP, you can start to visualize what some of those benefits could be, not just in the traceability, but also in the timeliness of inventory accuracy, in the timeliness of shipping product, in the timeliness of ultimately invoicing customers and collecting cash. So that whole, that whole cycle is improved through that process. But then you get into some of the more advanced companies that get into, this level 3 of active data. And the focus here is basically as you're collecting that data digitally off of the shop floor, then you can start to leverage, the industry buzz around machine learning and artificial intelligence. A little bit of a trivia test for you is what is the number one artificial intelligence use case in the industry today? A bit unusual, you might not expect this, but the number one use case that's, it's evolving quickly, but what it has been is being able to predict when you're going to have equipment failure, asset failure out on the shop floor. So when you think of noise and vibration analysis that potentially can happen by capturing that stuff digitally, and having that wealth of data available to you, you can then start to predict when that preventive maintenance needs to be done and, ultimately to keep you from having a failure that is, ultimately going to cause you downtime and, obviously cost you money and things of that nature. So, the whole machine learning and artificial intelligence relies on that digital transformation and gathering all that digital data that could be available to you out on the shop floor as you're going through this smart factory evolution. You just start to get a little bit better at the whole process. So that's one of the level 3s. Most companies are trying to get there with this, especially some of the larger customers that maybe have a little more budget to apply to this. But again, this is where the industry is going overall. So as part of your planning, start thinking about how do I leverage this? Where are my pain points today that maybe this kind of technology could help me? And then if I look at the fourth one's very advanced and adds a little element of risk to it. So as you may think about, I'm gathering all this data about the process itself that's out on shop floor. I've got a production operation going on, and I may be tracking what the temperature is or what the pressure is on a particular process that I have going on. I may know that my tolerances in the trend of that information is going in the wrong direction. And now, if at level 3, I'm starting to show that to an operator, and the operator can work with the technician or themselves, maybe in some cases, go in and make the adjustments in that process before it starts producing bad product. And so again, you're taking a proactive move towards making adjustments before I have a problem. Then in level 4 here, what happens is maybe I have the automation in place that makes that adjustment automatically through the process and starts to do that automatically, so the operator and a person doesn't need to make that adjustment automatically. So basically, think of that, the theory of a lights out production operation requires kind of this level 4 of a smart factory across the board. So this is the kind of the key elements associated to that smart factory evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for, that explanation there. And digital tools are everywhere, where these days, but often they don't make it to the shop floor team at small and mid-sized manufacturers. So, how can implementing them on the shop floor foster efficiency and future growth here?
Sure. One of the things that many of our customers are doing today, one of the common issues and one of the common problems out on a production facility is downtime. And that downtime basically is, if it's being manually tracked overall, typically it's not very accurate. The timing of how long we were down, how frequently we go down. A lot of micro stoppages happen in the food and beverage industry. Those packaging operations are a bit finicky at times, and the assets involved in doing that, the equipment involved, there's a lot of different downtime associated to set up and getting it tuned in, that the material coming through is good. All those kind of things can particularly produce downtime. And so in the digital side of this, when you have the automation involved, then you have the scenario where the start and stop of the production run will basically happen automatically. And so I get a much more accurate understanding of that downtime, what the number of occurrences is and how long each one lasts. And then you're leveraging the operator to basically tell you what the primary reasons are for that stoppage. So ultimately now I have a recording of data that I can reflect on. I can do some Pareto analysis over a week, over a month, timing on a particular line as necessary, depending on how granular you need to get. But you can start to look at, what my biggest downtime impacts are, what the timing is associated to that. And then, so all those things around productivity are certainly influenced by it. But the other one that kind of goes with it in the traceability theme we have a little bit going on is the scenario of, I need to accurately reflect what lot and material I'm using, excuse me, that goes into a production run to produce a finished good. And so all that lot traceability that can happen in the digitalized portion of an MES can be fed directly to the ERP. So now I have a good accounting of that for audits and record purposes and the necessary reporting for that. So those are all, pretty important ones. But again, having an MES capturing the inventory and the productivity, I think, are key elements to factor into this, because downtime is a big one. I'd like to encourage my customers to start to think about, what does a minute of downtime cost me? When we get into costs and start to look at that a little harder, those are factors to certainly consider. Most of the time it's underestimated what the impact truly is and what the cost truly is. And so now, once you're gathering good data, then you can start to make better decisions as you move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with increasing, regulatory demands for traceability and economic pressures that demand efficiency, right? Digital tools are important, not just for compliance, but for proactive modernization as well. So, what tools do you recommend for manufacturers who are really just beginning their digitization journey here?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a good question. I like to look at it, maybe a little biased, but part of the reason I've been involved with it for so long is that MES in warehouse management can really change an operation overall. And we've got a couple of testimonials that talk about it. And I'll talk a little bit about those. But in the MES world, you're looking, for instance, on the right-hand side of the screen right now, you got to be able to see a production dashboard. In many cases today, the transparency of what's happening out on the shop floor, whether that's for warehousing or whether that's for production, visibility, from a plant manager or a supervisor or the customer service team, having visibility of where do we stand on the production of a particular production run that a customer is waiting on, and you want to see what the status of it is. I want to see that in real time. Today, if you're in the kind of the manual mode without one of these systems, then you're in, basically it's a call out to the shop floor to check with the operator, see what the status is. But in most cases, that means walking out to the shop floor and getting into the production environment and going to see what's going on, when in fact, the tools are available so that I could look at that on my desktop if needed and see where we stand exactly. How much more time is involved in finishing that production run? How many units are we, away from completing this production schedule? Those kind of things. Again, very focused on productivity and transparency, and basically the connectivity of the shop floor to the rest of the organization. In many cases, quality is involved in this process. They may, at a certain point in a production run, need to execute a quality test. And so now I have, visibility from the lab, as an example, to be able to see where this production run is, so I can start to get ready to make sure that I'm ready to efficiently do the production or the quality test on that product. Maintenance may need to be involved. If I see on this dashboard that the production line is down, I may be able to now just look at this dashboard and see what the reason is for that stoppage. And it may be something that maintenance needs to get involved in. So that whole concept of the transparency of what's going on the shop floor creates a lot of different value and basically efficiencies across the board. We did talk a little bit about the inventory side of it. Obviously, we're converting raw material to finished good. But in addition to that, maybe there's process inspections that I need to do along the way as a part of my traceability, or from a major retailer's quality requirement at the end of the day, whether that's regulation or it's a customer requirement. Many customers require certain process checks along the way to make sure that the product they're going to get is being done to the spec that they're looking for. So, being able to execute a process inspection as to, did I start this new product correctly? Did I check the temperatures? Did I check the pressures? Ultimately, did I get a sample for the lab to check the quality of the product itself? But it's a process and product quality side of it. So those are things that need to be done. And then you have, in a lot of cases, you have that automation with the shop floor assets to be able to automatically track any downtime, uptime and downtime overall. Am I running at the speed I should be running at overall? And ultimately, do I have waste or scrap along the way? All those things that can be tracked digitally all improve your efficiencies. And ultimately, the quality of the product and ultimately customer satisfaction. But if I go next, I think the next topic is we're going to start to talk a little bit more about OEE, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts here with these, especially these 6 big losses here. If you can talk us through this slide. Yeah,
for sure. Thank you. The Smart Factory OEE and 6 big losses overall. So OEE is an industry metric. It's not unique. It's an industry metric overall. It's made up of 3 distinct metrics: availability, which is the uptime versus your downtime. Basically, overall, you're looking at what your available time is and how much of that time are we producing versus how much time are we not producing. And ultimately, that's the availability metric. In some cases, you may hear it as utilization metric as well. And then you have your performance. Basically, this is the speed, and the speed of the rate of production. And, ultimately, are we producing this particular product at the speed we're anticipating to do it? In a lot of cases, there's two industry theories on this. One is you have theoretical speed, which is basically what your asset equipment vendors provide you as how fast the equipment should go. But in a lot of cases, you're looking at more of a practical speed, meaning when we have a good production run overall, here's the speed that we're running at. And so ultimately, I want to have that as my metric and my baseline, and then I have my actual that's going on. How fast are we actually running? Do we have an issue or not? And then the third item is quality or yield in some cases, which is, good product versus total product produced versus the incoming product into the process. And so do I have any loss in that process overall? And so those three metrics together that are calculated together is what's called overall equipment effectiveness, OEE. And so 6 of the big losses here, I have a tendency to look at availability, my experience with, those 50 different Kaizen events and so forth. I find availability being roughly 70% of the root cause issues. That's where the biggest opportunities fall in my uptime versus my downtime. And so getting an accurate representation of that is key. And those issues could be associated to equipment failure. They could be that we have setup and adjustments going on to address materials that aren't quite working right. Those kind of things go into that. You may have defects in the product itself that causes downtime. So there's a variety of different root cause issues associated to that availability and that loss. But in some cases, it could be that I'm needing maintenance on a particular asset on that production line, and I have to slow it down to avoid the stoppage. It's very common in food and beverage plants that I have to slow down the process to make it stable in terms of running and so forth. So I may need to, if I'm running slow, I may need to track what the reason is why we're running slow. And then ultimately we can look at, okay, what adjustments need to be made? Is there maintenance that needs to be done to address that? Things of that nature to better understand it and get it back up to speed. And then in a lot of cases, you may have in food and beverage, it's a big one. I may have weight issues where a product is not meeting the weight requirements. So I may have a bump of material off the line because of weight, or I may have it because of metal detection. And, where there's an issue where there may be recognized a metal detector in line on the line may be kicking out product for that reason. Could be a variety of other issues why you may have scrap in that process. But again, all those items are, reduced yield in this case and reduced speed. All those are factors in the OEE. And those are the biggest items that most of the food and beverage customers, struggle with, on the production floor.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've talked a lot about how manufacturers can enhance efficiency with digital tools, to maximize productivity and margins. Another piece of digitization ties into what you mentioned earlier, traceability for regulatory demands like the FDA's Food Safety and Modernization Act, FSMA, Traceability Rule 204. So, why are digital tools important, not just for compliance, but for proactive modernization?
Yeah, it's a good one. This is a good one. Be honest with you, I have some empathy for those that are trying to do all this manually. If you think about all the requirement of, depending on what's showing here is kind of at the factory itself, the four walls of the business, from receiving, warehousing, production, and shipping. all those elements are part of that traceability for the product. But in some cases, you may have to go all the way to the farm, and where the crops are being managed and all that traceability before it even comes to you. And trying to track all that manually is a monumental task in my mind. So, the systems today, for instance, on the ERP side or the warehouse management side of things, of being able to, when I receive product in, I'm tracking the traceability in the lot associated to that material that's being received. Then I'm tracking through the warehouse management where that lot's being stored and what movement within the warehouse is that being done. And then that product is staged for production. I've got a digital transaction of all these items that are happening through the process in a more modern system to be able to do this, so that ultimately, as soon as I track that raw material at the production side and get to that finished good, ultimately going to shipping and out to a customer, I've got a full traceability in the ERP that shows that full path and that traceability for it. It's, and to do that manually is in my mind, a manual task, a monumental task, I should say. And so, being able to have this digitally, that I can go back and do reporting if I have an audit, things of that nature, or there's a recall on a product and so forth, I can go start to check what finished goods were impacted by a raw material lot that had an issue. And so now all of a sudden I've got, much quicker, more accurate information to be able to address any of those particular areas. To me, it's a straight up requirement to go down this path, so that you've got good traceability.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if a manufacturer, is ready to begin their digitization journey today, what should they consider to ensure a successful implementation?
Yeah, this is a good one as well. I think if I look back over time I've got over 20 MES implementations under my belt, as well as many customers as a product manager go through this process, where I see the most smooth implementations overall is when you create a focus with the shop floor team and engaging them in the process. Get some champions out on the shop floor, people that are, recognized as kind of the informal leaders out on the shop floor. Get their buy-in, make sure they understand what the reasons are to that we're trying to go down this particular path, so that they can have a positive influence on the rest of the team out on the shop floor. So I can't overemphasize enough to leverage and communicate the transparency of this to the shop floor, get their buy-in. Many of the folks, I think, probably have heard about the 8 wastes in lean production. And, I believe that one of the 8 wastes is non-utilized talent. I'd like to think of it as underutilized talent by not leveraging them properly. And this is where the shop floor can really shine, in my opinion. This is where I see the best implementations go, when there's buy-in out on the shop floor. We're not going to resist this change. We're going to embrace it because we see the benefits of it. It's benefit to the organization, but it's also benefits for us. Most of the time, when they start to see the tools and how the tools are used, they start to see this is going on. I think it's very important for the executive management team to be able to basically go through what I call an awareness session with the entire team as to what our goals are. What are our company objectives associated to this project? To make sure everybody is fully aware from top to bottom what our game plan is and why we have this game plan. I think those are key issues. And so companies that just kind of push it down to the shop floor, they struggle more than those that are including the shop floor and having them a part of the solution is some of what I consider the best practices.
Yeah, good advice there. I appreciate you giving our audience that. And, we've covered a lot of ground about how digital tools improve efficiency and traceability. And listeners are likely wondering, Steve, at this point, what's the impact on my bottom line, right?
For sure, for sure. It always kind of comes back to that. At the end of the day, you've got two primary issues. One is I got traceability, I got regulatory requirements I have to meet. That's the key thing. But we're all fundamentally in business to make a little money. And so, trying to manage that properly is key. And so, we've got a couple of examples. I'll use one that I think is a really good one overall. We've got a customer that they have a production operation where they do a lot of mixing and blending of product overall. And when they go through that mixing and blending, I need to be aware of what raw materials, we talk about the lot traceability and all that goes into a batch, and making sure that I'm going to make a good batch coming out of that. So what happens is, in our solution today, with the digital technology and barcoding, we can require, this is a configurable situation, we can require that the operator has to scan the lot barcode before it goes into the batch. And so when the production order comes down, it has what the raw material is, what the bill of material is, and what the lot should be for that product going into this particular batch. And if that doesn't match, if for some reason the wrong product was staged at the production area, the mixing batching area, then they could have saved them. In their particular case, it saved them from producing a bad batch. Bad batches, I've heard anywhere from, could be a $20,000 mistake, $50,000 mistake, on up to $100,000 or $200,000 mistake if I've got to completely scrap that batch, And so, in one example, one testimonial was, by that functionality saving us one bad batch, basically paid for the software itself. So that's one. It's kind of an extreme example, but it is an example. And then we've got another, when you start to look at the warehousing side of things, and the traceability and the inventory accuracy is another. We have a customer that has implemented these best practices with barcode scanning, lot and location control in this mix, and going through that process from production all the way into the warehouse. By tracking all that, they've increased their inventory accuracy from about 87% to 99% overall. And so folks can think about what the impact of that potentially is. In a lot of cases, that may mean I have to carry to address that gap of not having accurate inventory. I may have to carry extra inventory to make sure I can, I don't make the mistake of not having a raw material for a key production run, or I don't have the product for shipping to a customer. You think of those impacts, there's direct financial impacts, and then there's also reputational risk associated to that with your customers. So there's a lot of different scenarios where those improvements can be made. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, this is where I try to talk to our customers a bit about tracking and working with the finance team to understand what a minute of downtime costs on the production floor. There's a lot of indirect costs associated to downtime overall, and so if you go through with the finance team to calculate what does a minute of downtime cost us, and now we're tracking that through the MES, I can, if I've got a palletizer that is causing me too much downtime, and it's costing me a couple hours a month of downtime, I can calculate what the impact of that is. And what happens is those numbers add up much quicker than what they probably estimated overall. So the key is track what that OEE downtime is, and then do the math on what the impact is. It may justify some maintenance. It may justify a capital expenditure for a new palletizer if it's time. But in a lot of cases, that is, those numbers have a tendency to get everybody's attention. In addition to that, besides just the minute of downtime, which I think is probably the most important to do, but secondary, what is a point of OEE when I start to factor in the availability and the performance and the quality, those three metrics in there, what is a point of OEE worth to me? And so then you can start to look at that as to how do we improve our OEE overall. So all those items are key factors to the bottom line. Mm-hmm. Another key one I think is important. A lot of time customers are evaluating, should I, let's say business is good, right? And I've got, I need to do another shift, or do I need to do a capital expenditure on another production line? Those kind of things certainly have a lot of cost to them. So now if I can look real hard at what my productivity is, how do I increase my productivity on the assets in the lines I have today? Can I deal with our growth with that, or do I truly need the capital expenditure for expansion? The other could be that if it's in a down cycle where my costs are too high, I can start to look at my efficiencies again. And so could I reduce a shift, or not run as often, because I can improve my efficiencies on the lines I want to continue running, as an example. So typically that data and that information helps better decision making, whether we're growing or whether we're in a cost sensitive situation overall. So I think all those directly impact the bottom line.
Yeah, and great points. Just, those are significant impacts on the bottom line. I like how you brought in the reputation too, because that can affect the bottom line down the road too. So great points there. And so, if a manufacturer is ready to begin their smart factory journey, what are your recommendations at this point from moving from where they are to the next step?
Yeah. I think I would start to evaluate, what data am I really trying to focus on? What metrics am I currently curious about and interested in? I would be very focused on what the company objectives are. Again, going back to part of the discussion about, are we growing? Are we trying to find capacity? Are we trying to reduce cost? All those kind of things. I would just make sure that all those things are in alignment with kind of the direction we need to go. Is my, number one, with part of this topic is traceability. Is my traceability a problem right now? Am I having to do too much of that manually? Is there too much labor that goes into tracking that today and having to do an audit on it? And do I have all that information available? So that could be a big motivating factor to make sure that I'm looking at traceability and the functionality of a future solution. Does it match up my traceability needs? Start to look at what is my traceability plan? What is required for me, for my particular products and my customers? What traceability am I required to do? Do I have that traceability plan? So you can start to marry that plan up against the solution you're looking at. So I think going back with the inventory side of it, where does the inventory fall into the requirement overall? So in our particular case, that's probably the leading piece of it for our customers is getting a better handle on the inventory. But the others are the performance side of it is, so I look at MES and I look at inventory is one key factor and performance is the other. How well are we doing these processes? And so, what ones, how does that weigh out in your decision making, in terms of where do you need to go? Work on champions within the shop floor and, make sure you have a great communication plan to the team, around your objectives and what's trying to be accomplished.
Excellent. Great advice there, Steve. And thank you so much for your time. And we'd like to shift to some questions from our audience today. So let's jump right into these with the time we have remaining. And this first question is, how much customization is typically required? I think that's a great question here.
It is a really good one. To be honest with you, it's a bit of a sensitive one, especially in the IT industry overall. The customization is a challenge. If you're a software product company, you're trying to avoid customization, to avoid the one-off bit of work for one customer process, as an example. You're trying to avoid that as best you can. It's just not good business for a product company. On the other hand, customers want the process to work the way they do. And so I think the overall goal is, the goal is no customization overall. But the term I like to use is configuration. So we drive and design our product very focused on configuration. If a certain process needs to, behave a certain way, I used the example earlier. I want a forced scanning of raw material before it goes into a batch. I require that. Well, not every customer requires that or is in a position to do that at the beginning until they mature their process. So in our particular case, we treat that as a configuration. It's a preference that we can configure during the implementation phase to make it behave in the manner you want it to behave. There's always ultimately exceptions to that, but the more configurable the solution is, the better you can meet many of those customization requirements that you see from customers. So a part of that is just good overall architecture and design of software to be flexible, but configurable to put in the right business rules.
Excellent. Great answer there. Okay, another question here. What can we expect in regards to the implementation timeline? Yeah,
this is a good one, and I hate to be vague on it. So I'm gonna give you past experience on many of these, because the scope and scale of many of these implementations is pretty broad. So I'll give you a couple of the key factors. I would start with thinking 3 to 6 months overall. I would start with that mindset that an implementation is going to take me 3 to 6 months. 3 months on basically a somewhat simple implementation, but a lot of that's going to be based on the current maturity of your operation and your production facility today. And then, 6 months could be a little longer. And a couple of those key factors is the customer currently lot and location controlled? Because one of the things that may have to happen early in the implementation process is go through that best practice of getting the operation doing lot and location control. So that could be a key one. The other is, are we leveraging barcoding and labeling of locations in the warehouse? Do we got to go through a labeling of the warehouse and all the locations properly? So if all those things are there, you're leaning, more closer to the 3 months versus the 6 months. The number of locations, is it one plant location or more plant locations? All those have a tendency to be a factor as well. And then the other is, how many production lines are we talking? Is it one location with 20 production lines, or is it 5 production lines? All those will influence the level of effort and time involved. And then probably the fourth one is the sophistication or the advancement of automation. So typically that's kind of a phase 2 part of the process, meaning that if I'm going to connect shop floor assets into the MES, I've got to put the infrastructure in place to be able to do that. There's some industry standards around how that is done. In our particular solution, we do that. And so, but that's a project of, how many assets, how many signals, all of those kind of things influence the scope and scale of that, and whether or not we're going to do not do automation or do automation at the end of the day. So I think all those influence it, but I would go into it with the mindset that 3 to 6 months, depending on how sophisticated it is probably a good place to start.
Yeah, great answer there. Thank you for that. Yeah. All right, another question here. How do these systems handle data integrity and security for traceability records?
Yeah, it's another good one. And the cybersecurity is a tough one. It's all the rage these days, and certainly our organization has to be on top of it. We have a security officer, all those things apply. So, you have a variety of best practices around securing the software, around, logins and password controls, IP address restrictions. There's a variety of techniques, secondary validations, all those things, in terms of what would be considered best practice around cybersecurity are required. Datacor in our particular case is diligent around that topic. It's particularly required. In our particular case, one of the things that we've added in for the MES side of things, because we're working with mobile technology that arguably could be taken out of the plant facility and so forth, that we have an additional functionality of making sure that login and transactions cannot happen unless it's within the IP address of that plant. So as soon as they take it out of the plant, it won't work. Those transactions cannot be done. So there's an additional piece around that from a cybersecurity standpoint. When I look at the data integrity side of that, the key element there is, the traceability and the real-time API integrations from the shop floor transactions directly into the ERP improves data integrity significantly, what we've seen. One of the examples was the inventory accuracy from 87 to 99%. That's one example because of that technology and that real-time integration from the shop floor, WMS, into the ERP. So that improves significantly. The other piece of it is most of the time, if you're in the production facility and you're doing a production run, and I'm tracking on the clipboard how many items we're producing, what raw material we're doing, what happens is at the end of the day, in a lot of cases, some cases longer, that clipboard goes to the office and somebody's trying to interpret that handwriting and enter that data into the ERP. So our timeliness is wrong, meaning I may not have a raw material available to me anymore that I'm scheduling for the next production run because it hasn't been updated in real time in the ERP because of the inherent delay of the manual process. The numbers could be typed in wrong, they could be read wrong or written wrong. All those things add an element that compromises that data integrity overall. So I think just from that standpoint alone, it improves significantly. We've seen proof of that a little bit as well.
Yeah, great points there, and a great way to wrap us up here. I just want to thank you, Steve, for a great discussion today. We appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise with us, and also like to thank our audience for joining us today. We hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.
Thank you. My pleasure.